The year is 1933, and Germany is not just poor or struggling, it is mathematically and structurally broken. Official statistics from the German Labor Office show that more than 6 million people are unemployed, which translates to nearly 30% of the working-age population. Industrial production has collapsed to almost half of its 1928 level. Foreign exchange reserves at the Reichsbank are critically low, and the country is still traumatized by two economic disasters within a single decade. First, the hyperinflation of 1923 that wiped out middle-class savings, and then the Great Depression starting in 1929 that destroyed jobs, exports, and political stability. Soup kitchens are not symbolic images, but documented realities across Berlin, Hamburg, and the Ruhr. Newspapers from the period describe families selling furniture for food, and election data clearly shows that support for democratic parties collapses exactly in parallel with rising unemployment. Now fast forward to 1939, and the contrast appears almost unbelievable. German unemployment statistics show fewer than 200,000 unemployed workers. Industrial output exceeds pre-depression levels, and Germany possesses over 3,000 tanks, more than 4,000 military aircraft, and a fully mechanized army, despite having no domestic oil, limited iron ore, no natural rubber, and almost no foreign currency. This transformation is often described as the Nazi economic miracle, but economics does not allow miracles, only trade-offs, constraints, and costs. So the real question is not whether Germany recovered, but how it recovered and what price was paid. To understand this, we must begin with the structural trap created after World War I. Imperial Germany financed the war primarily through domestic borrowing rather than taxation, issuing war bonds to its own population under the assumption of victory. Defeat shattered that model, and the Treaty of Versailles imposed reparations equivalent to roughly 2.5% of German GDP annually payable in foreign currency or gold. At the same time, Germany lost resource-rich territories like Alsace-Lorraine and Upper Silesia, reducing export capacity while increasing import dependence. Balance of payments data from the early 1920s shows that Germany's export revenues were insufficient to cover imports plus reparations, forcing the Reichsbank to sell gold and foreign currency reserves. When those reserves ran low, the government printed money not because it misunderstood economics, but because default under Allied military pressure was politically impossible. This led to the hyperinflation of 1923, during which prices doubled every few days and the mark became effectively worthless. Yet unemployment remained low because money creation kept factories running. This is a crucial point often ignored. Hyperinflation destroyed savings but prevented mass unemployment. After stabilization through the Rentenmark and the Dawes Plan, Germany entered the so-called Golden Twenties. But this recovery was built on foreign capital inflows, particularly short-term loans from the United States. Reichsbank balance sheets from 1924 to 1928 show rising foreign liabilities. When the U.S. stock market crashed in 1929, those loans were recalled. German exports collapsed due to global protectionism. And once again, the Reichsbank faced a balance of payments crisis. This time, printing money was politically taboo due to inflation trauma. So the Weimar government chose deflationary austerity, cutting spending, raising taxes, and intentionally shrinking the economy to reduce imports and preserve foreign currency. Unemployment soared, and voting data from 1930 to 1932 shows a direct correlation between unemployment rates and Nazi vote share. This is the economic environment Adolf Hitler inherits in 1933. But Hitler is not an economist. The man who actually designs the recovery is Hjalmar Schacht, former president of the Reichsbank during stabilization, co-founder of the liberal German Democratic Party, and a banker deeply aware of Germany's structural weaknesses. When Schacht returns as Reichsbank president in March 1933, he faces three constraints that mainstream economics would consider mutually exclusive: reduce unemployment rapidly, finance massive rearmament, and avoid inflation or a foreign exchange crisis. Schacht's solution is not one policy, but an entire system of controls, accounting tricks, and coercion. The first pillar is massive deficit spending. Government expenditures rise sharply after 1933, but official budgets understate this increase because much of the spending is hidden. Schacht creates a dummy company called Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft, or MIFO. This company issues promissory notes known as MIFO bills to armaments manufacturers. These bills are guaranteed by the Reichsbank and can be discounted for cash. Functionally, this is money creation and government borrowing, but legally it appears as private commercial activity. Reichsbank internal documents later confirm that MIFO bills reach a volume exceeding 12 billion Reichsmarks by 1938, equivalent to roughly half of annual German GDP at the time. This spending reactivates idle factories and absorbs unemployed workers. Industrial utilization rates rise from around 50% in 1932 to over 80% by 1936. Unemployment collapses, but inflation does not appear because Schacht suppresses it. Through forced trade unions are abolished in May 1933 and replaced by the German labor front. Wages are frozen or rise only marginally despite productivity increases. Price controls are imposed selectively across sectors. Official price indices remain stable but shortages appear. Textiles, housing and consumer goods become scarce. Economic growth exists statistically, but household consumption data shows stagnation. Meanwhile, the foreign exchange problem becomes more severe. Germany's booming economy increases demand for imports, but exports remain constrained by global protectionism and an overvalued Reichsmark. Instead of devaluing the currency, Schacht imposes capital controls, import licensing, and bilateral trade agreements. German importers must apply for foreign currency and justify their needs. The state decides which imports are allowed. Strategic industries like steel and chemicals receive priority. Civilian sectors are squeezed. In 1934, Schacht announces a partial default on Germany's foreign debts, particularly to American creditors. This frees foreign currency but isolates Germany financially. Trade data shows a shift away from dollar trade toward clearing agreements with Eastern and Southeastern Europe, where Germany exchanges manufactured goods for raw materials without hard currency. This system works only under strict state control and political pressure. The moral cost of this system becomes clear in policies toward Jews. Jewish assets are restricted to prevent capital flight. Emigration is allowed only under severe asset limits. Reichsbank memoranda explicitly warn that unrestricted Jewish emigration would exhaust foreign reserves. Economics is used to justify oppression. By 1936, Germany has effectively reached full employment, but this is the turning point. Idle resources are gone. Further expansion requires either inflation or new resources. Schacht warns Hitler that continued spending risks collapse. Hitler rejects this logic, believing war is inevitable and necessary to secure resources. The four-year plan announced in 1936 places Hermann Göring above Schacht. Prioritizing autarky and rearmament over stability, Schacht resigns as economics minister in 1937 and is removed from the Reichsbank in 1939. The system he created survives him and becomes more extreme. Rearmament accelerates, civilian consumption falls, housing shortages worsen, and the economy becomes entirely subordinate to military goals. Germany's apparent strength in 1939 masks its fragility. Internal reports show fuel shortages, limited ammunition stockpiles, and dependence on rapid conquest. This explains why Germany pursues blitzkrieg rather than long war strategies. Initial victories are fueled by plunder, seized gold reserves, forced labor, and exploitation of occupied economies, but production statistics from World War II reveal the limits of coercive economics. By 1943, the United States alone outproduces Germany in aircraft, tanks, ships, and fuel. The Soviet Union surpasses Germany in tank and artillery production. Despite devastation, coercion cannot replace scale, resources, and innovation. The so-called Nazi economic miracle, therefore, must be understood as a temporary mobilization achieved through repression, accounting manipulation, and externalization of costs. It reduced unemployment by destroying freedom, controlled inflation by creating shortages, and solved resource constraints through conquest and genocide. This is not an argument about ideology. It is an economic lesson supported by data, institutions, and outcomes. Growth without sustainability leads to collapse, and efficiency without ethics leads to catastrophe. Understanding this history matters today because it shows how economic policy can be weaponized, how impressive numbers can hide structural rot, and how fear can justify control. If this analysis challenged your assumptions about economic miracles and power, then continuing to explore these topics is how real understanding develops. And if you think this was genuine recovery or simply delayed collapse, that question is worth debating.